The moment my mother pulled the gleaming red SUV into our cracked driveway, and my little brother, Jace, slid off the brand new, growling motorcycle like a rock star, waving for applause, I knew exactly what they'd done. I'd watched every transaction hit the phony gold card in real time. They thought they'd successfully milked their responsible daughter one last time. What they didn't know was that the card in my mother's wallet wasn't linked to anything that could ruin my life. It was the final trap I'd been setting for months. They thought they bought their freedom with my credit. They just paid the down payment on their own collapse. Eden Stewart, at 28 years old, stepped out onto the tiny, sun-drenched porch of her rented duplex in Riverton, Colorado, cradling a mug of coffee. It was a Saturday morning that promised to be perfectly ordinary, the kind of quiet day she cherished after a demanding week as a risk analyst. That peace shattered the second the sound hit her. First, it was a low, aggressive rumble, and then the flash of something painfully bright, a gleaming fire-engine-red SUV, large enough to practically block the street, rounded the corner and pulled directly up to her curb. It was the kind of vehicle that screamed new money and high payments, a gaudy monument to poor financial decisions. At the wheel, my mother, Marla Stewart, was beaming, wearing oversized sunglasses and a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk. Trailing Marla was the source of the aggressive noise. My little brother, Jace, who was all of 23 but acted perpetually like a teenager who just won the lottery. He was astride a massive, matte black motorcycle, custom-fitted with pipes that vibrated the fillings in my teeth. He executed a flawless, dramatic stop, killed the engine with a flourish, and slid off, adjusting his helmet as if he were dismounting on the main stage at Coachella. They both turned to me, ready for the praise, the shock, the inevitable questions that would allow them to regale me with their thrilling acquisition story. I felt the familiar cold knot tighten in my stomach, but it wasn't due to surprise. It was a preemptive strike of dread. My phone, tucked into my back pocket, had been vibrating consistently since 9 o'clock that morning. Each buzz was a notification, a grim little electronic receipt for the total, utter disregard they had for me, and for the promise Marla had made just 3 days prior when she borrowed my card for an urgent, supposedly $2,000 emergency medical bill. Now, instead of a hospital receipt, I was staring at about $60,000 worth of transportation parked 15 feet from my porch. A few neighbors, who normally just gave a curt nod, were peeking from behind their window blinds, mistaking the flashy display for some kind of sudden, unexpected family success. They had no idea this was, in fact, an execution. Marla killed the engine of the SUV, which somehow felt louder in the sudden quiet, and strode toward me, her arms outstretched, performing a perfect, casual display of motherly affection. She reached into her expensive-looking handbag, which I knew she hadn't paid for, and pulled out the gold-colored card. She tossed it onto the small, chipped wooden table next to me, treating it like a gum wrapper or a dirty napkin. "Here you go, honey," she chirped, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We're all set. Better put this away before Jace or I decide we need a new flat-screen TV. There's probably maybe $20 left on it. Don't go crazy now." The casual cruelty of the delivery was breathtaking. She didn't thank me. She didn't apologize for the lie about the medical bill. She issued a condescending warning about my own spending habits while implicitly claiming ownership of my entire credit line. The subtext was always the same. Your money is our money, and since we need it more, you should be grateful we left you anything at all. I picked up the card, the plastic feeling slick and cheap in my fingers. I forced my eyebrows into an expression of confused worry, pulling the familiar Marla and Jace anxiety performance out of my repertoire. "Wait, Mom, what happened? I thought this was just for the hospital. That emergency $2,000 thing?" I asked, keeping my voice soft, laced with the worry she expected. Marla waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that was sorted. We used that. But then, things came up. Jace needed reliable transportation for that new gig he's got lined up, and my old car was just a death trap. Sweetie, You wouldn't want your mother driving around in a death trap, would you? You know how good your credit is. Eden, it was the right thing to do for the family. It was always the right thing to do for the family. I reached for my phone and opened the banking application. I held it up, letting them see the screen reflect my face, ensuring my expression was perfectly readable. Stressed, confused, slowly realizing the horror. But inside, I was utterly calm. I already knew what the screen showed, having monitored it all morning. The card wasn't just maxed, it was overmaxed. The transactions log scrolled down: Riverfront Motors, the down payment and first installment, custom auto wraps for Jace's bike, elite sound systems, for the new speakers in the SUV, and finally, Miller's Motorcycle Emporium. Not a single cent, not even $1, had gone to a medical facility. It was precisely what I had predicted 4 days ago, down to the choice of dealership. I lowered the phone, exhaling slowly, performing the part of the daughter who had just been financially gutted. This was the moment of the twist. They had no idea that the real key to my financial freedom, the platinum credit card linked to my life savings and my work account at Solace Metrics, the $100,000 line of credit I had actually worked for, was still tucked safely in my wallet, secured behind 3 layers of passwords. The card Marla had just tossed onto my table, the one now practically smoking from overuse, that was the bait card. I had opened the account 5 months ago at a different bank, a separate entity entirely, under the alias Household Stuff in my app, giving it a ridiculously low limit, low enough to cover the alleged emergency, but nowhere near enough to destroy my future. It was the test, the trap, and the final piece of evidence I needed. Jace, sensing the drama was over and feeling the need to capitalize on his mother's brazenness, sauntered closer. He leaned his elbow on the railing, beaming with a smug entitlement that made my teeth ache. "Hey, don't look so stressed, sis," he said, his voice loud enough for the nosy neighbors to catch. "You should be proud. We finally got some decent wheels in the family. Your good credit finally did something for the family, you know? It's not like you were using that limit anyway." He was a masterpiece of casual theft, a walking illustration of the financial parasite Marla had raised. You should be proud. He was telling me to feel honored to be robbed. In every previous confrontation, I would have detonated. I would have launched into a screaming match about the betrayal, the lies, the sheer audacity of stealing from the one person keeping them afloat. But not today. I smiled, a small, polite, chillingly soft smile. "I appreciate you letting me know. Jace," I said, tucking the bait card into my pocket. "Both of you, I really do." Marla and Jace exchanged a baffled glance. This wasn't the script. She expected hysterics, maybe tears, certainly a furious phone call to the bank. "That's it?" Marla asked, frowning, clearly disappointed by the lack of emotional fallout. "That's it," I confirmed, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Enjoy the new cars. I've got a lot of work to do. See you guys later." I turned my back on the bright red SUV and the roaring black motorcycle, walking slowly back into the duplex. I didn't rush. I didn't slam the door. I just shut the cheap wooden door, letting the silence of my tiny living room swallow the noise of their confusion. I could still hear them outside, mumbling to each other, trying to figure out why their usual manipulation tactics hadn't worked. Alone in my small, organized kitchen, I placed my coffee on the counter and opened my laptop. I bypassed my usual work folders and navigated to the file named Recipes. Inside, there was no list of ingredients or cooking instructions. The folder was a secure, triple-encrypted archive of every single transgression committed over the past 10 years. Screenshots of overdraft fees I covered, copies of utility bills they refused to pay, detailed logs of cash I sent, and 27 audio recordings of Marla's manipulative calls. This new car purchase wasn't the start of the conflict. It was merely the final, incontrovertible piece of evidence I needed to close the case. I opened the log for the Household Stuff account. There it was. The charge for Riverfront Motors. Time-stamped and clear. The transaction was a clean, clinical confession. I leaned back in my chair and confessed the truth to the quiet room, to myself. I didn't have to do this. I could have stopped the bait card from being used, but I let it happen. I let the opportunity for grace, the tiny $2,000 opportunity, pass, because I had to know for sure if they were given one final chance to choose responsibility, honesty, or basic human decency, and they chose greed instead, then I had no reason to continue deceiving myself about who they were. The test was over. I closed the laptop with a decisive click, feeling a cold, righteous clarity settle over me. They thought they had just bought their freedom with my credit. They had no idea they just paid the down payment on the day everything they owned would be hauled away. The red glow of the SUV's taillights had long faded, but the chill it left wasn't from the Colorado air. It was the familiar subterranean cold of a memory, the place where the Eden who had just executed a masterful financial trap merged with the 14-year-old girl who had first become the family's unwilling ATM. Millstone, Ohio, a tired factory town whose best days were a decade in the rearview mirror. That's where the engine of this financial parasitism first sputtered to life. I was 14, sitting at our chipped formica kitchen table, the low light of the overhead lamp illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stale air. My hands, small and slightly trembling, hovered over the glowing screen of our bulky second-hand laptop. I wasn't doing homework. I was navigating the maze of late payment portals. The electric bill was 60 days past due. The water was due for shutoff, and the rent was a week away from being filed for eviction. Marla was usually sitting right across from me, but she wasn't tracking the numbers. She was smoking a cigarette, exhaling a thin, toxic plume of smoke towards the ceiling, staring vaguely out the window. "It's just so exhausting being a single mother. Eden," she'd sigh, her voice practiced, weary, and weaponized. "You have no idea the sacrifices I make, the constant struggle." It was the foundational narrative of our household. Marla, the martyr, I, the silent savior. My father had left when I was 10. The official story, the one Marla polished and presented to every relative and neighbor, was that he was a coward who abandoned his family right when we needed him most. But in the quiet corners of my memory, I held the fragments of the truth. Not of abandonment, but of explosive arguments that always centered on money. I remember the white-hot intensity in his eyes as he held up a bank statement, his voice raw. "Where did $2,000 go in a week? Marla, where? I work 70 hours a week, and you treat it like confetti." He didn't run from his family. He ran from the tidal wave of debt Marla created, a wave he knew would drown him eventually. His exit, I now understood, was a desperate act of financial self-preservation. While my friends spent their after-school hours at the town square or the local movie theater, I was clocking in at the grocery store, working the late shift. I was tall for my age, easy to mistake for 16, which was enough for the manager to look the other way. My real money, the serious cash, came from fixing neighbors' broken laptops and phones on the side. Every dollar earned, from the $10 repair fee to the $50 paycheck, was funneled immediately into the gaping black hole of Marla's unpaid bills, plugging holes in the dam she insisted on poking new ones into. It started subtly. Marla began introducing me to others not as her daughter, but as the responsible one. "Don't worry about the deposit, Frank. I overheard her telling the landlord on the phone once. Eden, she's the responsible one. She'll handle the rest of it by Friday." The praise was addictive, a warm, bright spotlight in an otherwise dark home. It felt good to be the one who could fix things. Meanwhile, Jace was left completely unchecked. He dropped out of high school his freshman year, spent his days playing video games, and once totaled a borrowed car by driving it drunk. Marla never yelled at him. She just sighed dramatically and said, "He's got a big spirit, just needs to find his path." Jace was the dreamer, the precious baby. I was the engine, the mule, the designated financial float. The mold of one to carry the weight, one to be coddled, was cast in concrete. The real shift happened when I was 18. I was the first person in our family line to get into an out-of-state college. A genuine escape plan. The week before I left, I packed my single suitcase, dreaming of a life where the phrase past due was just a technical term, not a nightly anxiety. Then Marla produced the stack of papers. "Sweetie, before you go, can you just sign these for me?" she said, standing next to me in the dim hallway. "It's just to secure the house, so they know someone responsible is still here. Just paperwork to keep your childhood home safe." I signed the papers, trusting her implicitly. I believed I was helping Marla secure the Millstone house. In reality, I was signing myself onto the mortgage as a co-signer, becoming legally bound to a 30-year debt. I also unwittingly added my name to several utility accounts and even a couple of low-limit store credit cards she claimed she needed to rebuild her credit. I told myself it was temporary. Once I graduated, got a real job, and stabilized my own life, I would insist she remove my name. I would finally be free. But the calls followed me to the dorm room. The university operator, a friendly-sounding woman, would interrupt my study sessions to say, "Eden Stewart, line 1, it's a collections agent." The debt hadn't stalled. It was accelerating. The $200 I sent home every month for groceries clearly wasn't going to groceries. The first tremor of genuine suspicion hit during Christmas break in my freshman year. I found a pile of unopened store credit card bills addressed to Marla, but bearing my name, tucked under a stack of magazines. I opened them. They showed thousands of dollars in purchases. Designer clothes, expensive decorative items, things I had never seen in our chronically cluttered house. When I tentatively confronted her, I remember trying to be gentle, to sound concerned, not accusatory. Marla immediately crumpled. She didn't deny it. She just started crying. Large, performative sobs. Her voice breaking as she launched into her greatest hits album. "How can you accuse your mother? After I sacrificed my entire youth for you. You're the reason I even had to get these. Don't you know how hard it is to maintain a decent lifestyle for you and Jace?" I ended up apologizing. Of course, I always did. Jace, meanwhile, was thriving in his delusion at family gatherings. Marla would introduce him as our little Jace. He's got big dreams, just hasn't met his moment yet. I was introduced only when the subject drifted to responsibility or career stability. "And this is Eden. She's great at math. She handles the bills." I internalized the lesson she taught me. Love meant being burdened. Responsibility meant suffering losses. I swallowed the bitter thought that if I just kept carrying them long enough, eventually, they would wake up and be the functional, loving family I craved. I genuinely believed that if I poured enough financial stability into their chaos, they would eventually stabilize themselves. That naive belief held strong until one cold November night. During my senior year of college, I had driven home briefly to sign some more papers Marla insisted were urgent after she fell asleep. I walked out of the house, drove down the street to the deserted business district, and found myself standing in front of the Millstone Bank branch, which had closed hours ago. I pressed a final notice for foreclosure, one I had intercepted from the mail. Against the cold, reflective glass of the ATM lobby, the letter spelled out the end. If I didn't cover a shortfall of $7,000, the process would begin. Staring at my reflected teenage face, drawn and tired in the dim light, I didn't feel despair. I felt a promise forming, cold and hard as the glass itself. I swore to that reflection, to the ghost of my father who had run, and to the collection agents waiting on my phone. I will get out of here, and once I am truly out, I will never, ever allow this to happen to me again. By the time I was 26, I had achieved what felt like impossible distance from Millstone, Ohio. I was in Riverton, Colorado, working as a risk analyst for Solace Metrics, a sharp fintech company. The pay was good, enough to cover my rent at the duplex, eat decent food, and finally, start building a respectable savings account. But the escape wasn't total. Every month, without fail, 20% of my paycheck still vanished back to Millstone. It was a tax on my freedom, a kind of mandatory guilt payment to Marla to keep her from blowing up my phone with emergency pleas and self-pitying monologues. I started noticing a pattern that was too precise to be coincidence, a perfect, sinister choreography. I would get a promotion, a significant bonus, or hit a new savings milestone, and within 72 hours, a crisis would erupt back home. The water heater would explode, Jace would need emergency dental work, or there would be an unforeseen legal fee to pay. It was a Pavlovian response. Eden succeeds. Therefore, the family needs a massive cash injection. My achievements were simply interpreted as newly available funds. Marla was more blatant than ever in staking her claim. When talking to cousins and aunts, the people who formed her crucial echo chamber, she stopped referring to my income as Eden's money and simply called it our house money. She always capped it off with the same phrase, a verbal IOU note she cashed daily. She wouldn't have what she has today without me. You know, I sacrificed everything. The small betrayals morphed into outright theft, and the evidence started appearing in cold, hard print. While preparing my taxes one year, my CPA flagged something unusual. For 4 consecutive years after I had moved out and started working full-time, Marla had continued to claim me as a financial dependent. She had been using my Social Security number to receive significant tax refunds, money that, by law, belonged only to me, a fully independent, working adult. The discovery was less a shock and more a dull, heavy confirmation. When I gently confronted her, holding the printed tax documents, Marla immediately executed her master move, the role reversal. "Unbelievable," she hissed, tears already welling up in her eyes, but her voice was steel. "After all I did, after your father left, who was there for you? Who starved so you could have a decent pair of shoes? And now you nitpick over a few dollars from the government? You call your own mother a thief? You are so ungrateful. Eden, so cold." The conversation inevitably ended the same way, with me, the victim of fraud, apologizing to her, the perpetrator. It was a psychological trick honed over 2 decades, designed to ensure that my guilt always outweighed my anger. But my professional life was starting to infect my personal reality. At Solace Metrics, my day job involved building algorithms to detect sophisticated fraud, identity theft rings, and predatory lending schemes. I spent 8 hours a day staring at transaction patterns that screamed malice and manipulation. Gradually, the cases I saw on my screen, the fabricated addresses, the unauthorized co-signing, the desperate victim trying to claw back their stolen credit, began to look exactly like the family drama unfolding in my own life. One Tuesday, I was looking over a particularly brazen case of a mother using her adult child's details to fund a luxury trip. My closest colleague, Taryn, a quick-witted woman who often saw the absurdity in the financial world, leaned over my desk. "Seriously, Eden," Taryn said, half joking as she pointed at the screen. "If your family keeps using you like a personal ATM, the least you could do is start logging their transactions like a real fraud case, for fun." Taryn's throwaway comment wasn't funny. It was a revelation. It provided the framework, the clinical, objective language I needed to finally deal with the chaos. This isn't love. This is fraud. This isn't family. This is a case file. The idea took root. I realized I couldn't just cut them off immediately. Years of co-signed debts meant a sudden break would crash their house and drag my credit down with it. I needed a surgical exit strategy. And for that, I needed undeniable evidence of intent. I needed a final test that even Marla couldn't cry her way out of. The catalyst came during another manipulative phone call. Marla was crying, claiming she was being evicted and needed $2,000 for a final last-chance payment to the landlord. She swore on her life, on my future, on everything sacred, that this would be the last time she ever asked. It was a performance so elaborate it should have won an Emmy. After that call, I didn't send the wire transfer. I acted. I quietly opened a new checking account at a completely different, smaller bank across town. Crucially, I attached a secondary, gold-colored credit card to this account. I set the credit limit deliberately low, only $5,000, just enough to cover a real, genuine emergency, but too little to buy anything substantial. In the banking app on my phone, I labeled the account Household Stuff, burying it under my main, robust savings and investment accounts. I then called Marla back. "Mom, I can't keep wiring cash," I told her, my voice weary but firm. "It messes up my budgeting. I got a new card, a backup card. It's got a small limit, but it's new. Only use this for actual, real emergencies, like hospital trips only, and you need to pay it back immediately, okay?" I lied to her by omission. I didn't tell her it was a secondary account. I didn't tell her it was under continuous surveillance. I didn't tell her the money wasn't linked to my main wealth. I just emphasized the new card and the strict purpose. The relief in Marla's voice was palpable. She saw an easy new stream of cash. She promised. She swore. She wept with gratitude. I mailed the card the next day. I stood by the mailbox, watching the envelope disappear into the postal system, feeling the cold weight of anticipation. I knew Marla. I knew Jace. The script was written. I looked down at the real platinum card still securely in my wallet, the symbol of my actual financial security. This new gold piece of plastic was nothing to me but a wire in a carefully laid trap. I thought to myself, if they genuinely needed help, they would use the card once for the stated emergency and immediately figure out how to pay it off. But if they used it exactly like they always had, as an excuse to steal, as proof that my credit was their property, then I would finally have the objective, undeniable proof I needed. I would have no more reason to defend them, no more room for self-deception. The test had begun. The only thing left to do was wait for them to take the bait. The silence after I mailed the bait card lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of unnerving, quiet expectation, like waiting for a perfectly timed clock to tick its final second before detonation. I focused intensely on my work at Solace Metrics, poring over fraud patterns, using the cold logic to suppress the rising anxiety I felt about the inevitable call. It came on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of a risk assessment meeting when my phone, set to silent, flashed a call from Marla. I excused myself and stepped into the quiet hallway. Marla's voice wasn't the usual dramatic wail. It was a hushed, trembling whisper of pure desperation. "Eden, honey, you have to help. It's Jace. He's had a minor accident. Nothing life-threatening, but he needs x-rays, and the car needs fixing now. The insurance is being difficult, and they need $5,000 up front for the diagnostics and the urgent repairs." She was crying, not loudly, but with the specific, controlled distress that always broke my reserve. My gut screamed, "Don't," but I needed the evidence to be clean, the breach of trust to be absolute. I played the concerned sister and daughter, but with a new layer of clinical scrutiny. "What hospital, Mom? Did you file an official report? What's the claim number for the insurance?" I pressed. The story frayed immediately. She named a hospital 50 miles away, then quickly changed it to a small clinic closer to Millstone. The insurance details were vague. The repair shop was just some guy Jace knows. With every additional question, her details shifted, revealing the shaky scaffolding of a lie being built in real time. Despite the blaring alarm bells, the inconsistent details, the high round number of $5,000, I gave her the bait card information. I was meticulous. I stressed the low limit. Only enough for the emergency. Mom, $5,000 is the absolute maximum, and emphasized its singular purpose, only for the clinic and the immediate critical repair. Marla was effusive in her promises. "We'll pay it back. I swear. Your mother's old. Honey." I panicked. "I just need you to trust me this one time." She layered on the guilt, the helplessness, the maternal dependency, all the old triggers. I stayed clinically detached, reciting the terms, knowing she wouldn't keep them. The next day, the notifications started pouring into the banking app I had specifically set up to monitor the bait card. 11 o'clock a.m. Pending charge at Riverfront Motors. Not the body shop Marla had mentioned, but the new car dealership I had predicted. The down payment for the SUV. 1 o'clock p.m. Custom auto finishes. Jace's promised paint job and custom decals for the motorcycle. 3 o'clock p.m. Elite sound systems. An enormous charge for high-end speakers and a navigation system. 5 o'clock p.m. Miller's Motorcycle Emporium. The final, large chunk that maxed out the card. Across all 4 transactions, there was not a single charge, not a dime, for any hospital, clinic, X-ray, or official repair service. It was a perfectly executed, 100% recreational spending spree. I didn't call. I didn't text. I opened the recipes folder on my laptop and systematically took screenshots of every single transaction log, complete with the time and vendor information. I set up the banking app to automatically archive every new alert to a secure cloud drive and emailed the entire log to a backup address. The emotion that swept over me wasn't the familiar, corrosive acid of shock or the heat of betrayal. It was a cold, pure, exhilarating clarity. This was not a mistake. This was not a temporary lapse in judgment under stress. This was a deliberate, cold-blooded choice to exploit the last lifeline I had extended. The test had not just been failed, it had been spit upon. I needed to see them one last time before the hammer fell. That weekend. I drove the 300 miles back to Millstone for the customary Sunday dinner. I arrived late Saturday evening. Marla met me at the door, draped in a new, slightly too tight designer jacket, a brand I recognized from the mall near the car dealership. She looked refreshed, not distraught. "Oh, Eden, darling," she chirped, kissing me lightly on the cheek. "Things are finally looking up. I'm finally able to breathe a little." During the chaotic dinner the next day, Jace couldn't stop talking. He was buzzing with energy, demonstrating his newly acquired knowledge of engines and suspension. He kept talking about how he had manifested the motorcycle, detailing its specs as if his cosmic destiny, not my credit score, had been the true source of its purchase. He took full, self-congratulatory credit for the vehicle that was, at that very moment, a fraudulent liability on my record. I decided to run the soft test. I turned to Jace, my expression neutral, cutting through his monologue. "Jace, I'm glad you're feeling better. That accident sounds like it was awful. What was the name of the clinic you went to? I want to look into the follow-up care." The atmosphere at the small, cluttered dining table instantly condensed. Jace froze, a piece of chicken halfway to his mouth. The clinic? It was just some clinic, out past the highway. I forget the name." Marla jumped in, too quickly. "It was St. Jude's, honey. Yes, St. Jude's. They were wonderful. Just a small outpatient thing." I knew there was no St. Jude's clinic in Millstone. "Right, St. Jude's," I nodded slowly. "And Jace, what time did you get there? I know Mom said it was urgent, but I'm just curious about the wait time." They looked at each other, their eyes darting, trying to silently coordinate their fake timeline. Jace said 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Marla insisted it was a frantic, middle-of-the-night emergency around 11 p.m. They hadn't even bothered to harmonize their lie. They were so confident in my perpetual obedience that they treated me not as a person they owed an explanation, but as a resource that required only the minimum plausible fiction to tap. The moment of truth arrived when I brought up the card. "Mom, I need the card back," I said, keeping my voice quiet. "The limit's been hit. I need to close that account and clean up the balances immediately, before it damages my credit score." Marla laughed, a light, genuine burst of dismissal. "Oh, come on. Eden, don't be silly. The bank will increase the limit. They always do. Your credit is gold. Honey, we need that card for next month's mortgage payment. Don't worry your pretty little head about it." The words were a hammer blow. We need that card for next month's mortgage payment. It wasn't a temporary emergency fund. It was a permanent, essential lifeline that she had factored into their monthly budget. My financial life was their default resource, a perpetual fund they believed they had earned the right to draw from endlessly. Something snapped. It wasn't the explosive rage I used to feel. It was a cold, decisive severance. I stood up from the table, my fork clattering onto my plate of half-eaten mashed potatoes. "I have to go," I announced. Marla was mid-sentence, talking about a cousin's wedding. She stopped, startled. "Go? Eden, we haven't had dessert. What's wrong?" "I have to go back to Riverton," I repeated, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. "I'm sorry. I just remembered I have an urgent commitment." For the first time in my 28 years, I walked away from a family gathering while it was still in session. I didn't look back. I just got into my old, sensible sedan and drove away from Millstone. The drive back to Riverton was long and silent, but my hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from the coffee, but from the internal tremor of a major paradigm shift. The trembling wasn't because of the $5,000 they stole. It was because I had finally allowed myself to acknowledge the chilling truth. To Marla and Jace, I was not their daughter or sister. I was an asset, a utility, nothing more than an account with the Stewart last name. And that realization was the only thing I needed to start the dismantling. The drive back from Millstone, still reeling from my dramatic exit from the dinner table, deposited me back at my Riverton duplex after 4 hours. That night, there was no sleep. The clarity I had felt on the road had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. It was time to move beyond the bait card and see the full, terrifying extent of the damage. I sat down at my laptop, no longer the weeping victim, but the risk analyst in charge of a high-stakes investigation. I downloaded my 3 comprehensive credit reports from Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, and began to dissect them line by line. The scope of the financial infection was far worse than the sporadic, chaotic emergencies Marla had manufactured. Scrolling through the pages of debt, I started finding accounts that didn't belong. There was a revolving charge account from a regional furniture store in Columbus, Ohio, a city I'd never lived in, with a balance of nearly $8,000. There were overdue utility bills for an apartment complex in a Millstone suburb I'd only driven past. Marla had apparently been leveraging my name and credit as a phantom co-tenant for years, silently funneling debt through me into places I had never set foot. Then I found the one that was closest to the bone, a store credit card, opened years ago under my name in Millstone, showed a lengthy history of purchases and consistent late payments. The contact address listed was, of course, the Millstone house. It had accumulated debt for so long that its very existence was a quiet, constant drag on my score. It was a clear, tangible monument to her willingness to commit identity fraud for inexpensive household goods. The hardest blow came when I dug into the mortgage details. The Millstone house. I knew I was a cosigner, but the cold reality of the paperwork was staggering. The account statements showed multiple instances of payments being 30 or 60 days late, a pattern of negligence that put the entire family's housing at risk. More crucially, if the bank decided to foreclose, they wouldn't just go after Marla, whose income was sporadic and undocumented. They would target the co-borrower with the stable, documented income, me. My escape wasn't just threatened, it was an illusion built on shaky debt. My analytical mind demanded proof of her intent. I logged into the secured bank portal and requested scans of the original mortgage contract and all subsequent refinancing and extension papers. When the PDFs arrived, I pored over the signatures. The original signature from when I was 18 looked clumsy, but it was mine. However, on the 3 extension agreements signed in the intervening years, papers that would have kept the low interest rate, papers I never saw, the signatures were disturbingly similar to mine, but not exactly right. They were too smooth, too perfect, lacking the genuine, organic flaws of my own handwriting. It was a painstaking forgery, suggesting that Marla, or someone she instructed, had simply signed my name to legal documents without my knowledge or consent. I called Taryn, my colleague. The next morning, I stripped the situation of all emotional language, presenting it as a professional challenge. I told her I was investigating a case of familial financial fraud and needed a visual aid. Taryn, A whiz with data visualization helped me. We printed every document: the strange store card statements, the late payment warnings, the forged mortgage extensions. We used different colored sticky notes to map the timeline, turning the emotional ordeal into a clinical, color-coded storyboard that showed the pattern of exploitation escalating year after year. The twist of the timeline: when Taryn tabulated the debt-to-income ratio based on the hidden loans and the millstone mortgage liability, the number was devastating. On paper, I looked like a financial disaster waiting to happen. The credit score I had worked so hard to build, the score Marla kept praising as gold, was just a number on a rapidly sinking ship. This discovery didn't just threaten my mother's house, it threatened my carefully crafted future. I had been planning to buy my own apartment in Riverton within the next 6 months, but with this massive, undeclared debt hanging over me, no ethical lender would touch my application. Marla's greed wasn't just drawing money from me, it was actively sabotaging my future autonomy. I knew I needed to provoke her for the final piece of audio evidence. I called her later that day, approaching the topic subtly, implying I had merely glanced at my credit score. "Mom, the bank is calling me about late payments on the mortgage," I said, trying to sound genuinely worried. "I saw some old accounts on my credit report that don't look right. We need to talk about who opened them." Marla instantly went on the offensive, defensive armor clanging into place. "Oh, please, Eden, don't start with this. Family shares everything. You know that? It's all keeping the family afloat. Besides, where would you be without me? Who was there when your father bailed?" It was the same loop, the same guilt trip she'd been running for nearly 20 years. I let her rail, absorbing the abuse, waiting for the crack. In her rising fury, trying to prove how much she knew about my finances, how much she deserved the access, she made the critical mistake. "You know, you're worried about that little store card, but you should be worried about that other one," she snapped, clearly referring to one of the major cards I actually kept for emergencies. "The one with the 19.99% interest rate. You need to pay that off." The blood drained from my face, not because of the number, but because of the specific detail. I had never discussed the interest rate of my professional credit cards with her. She had gained unauthorized access, likely by fishing through my old emails or using old passwords, and had been monitoring my actual, protected financial life for far longer and far deeper than I ever imagined. The violation was complete. I had activated the full call recording feature on my phone before the conversation started. I listened back to the entire exchange, the denials, the manipulative guilt-tripping, and the final chilling slip that proved intentional, deep-seated invasion of my financial privacy. This wasn't negligence. This was espionage. I immediately saved the audio file, renaming it Marla Confession, and backed it up to 3 separate physical drives and 1 encrypted cloud service. Looking at the timeline Taryn and I had created, the web of lies, the forged signatures, the intentional fraud, I knew the time for internal accounting was over. The internal investigation was closed. It was time for external action. My cursor hovered over a new email draft. The recipient was Marcus Lowell, a highly recommended local attorney specializing in financial fraud. The subject line was succinct. The first line of the body text was a statement of fact, stripped of any emotion or regret. "My mother has been using my identity for several years. The office of Marcus Lowell, located downtown in a sleek, modern building, smelled of old leather and expensive disinfectant. The aroma of serious business. Marcus, a man in his late 50s with a calm, deliberate manner, didn't flinch when I presented the color-coded timeline and the recorded confession. He didn't try to minimize the situation as a misunderstanding or just family stuff. He laid out the legal reality on his mahogany desk with surgical precision. "Aiden, what your mother and brother have done is not merely family drama or mismanagement," he stated, his voice low and firm. "It is, at minimum, identity theft, credit fraud, and forgery on legal documents, all of which carry significant criminal penalties. The severity here is high because the fraud was repeated, intentional, and used your secured information, which your mother later admitted to accessing. He immediately advised a three-pronged legal strategy. First, formally dispute the transactions on the bait card with the bank. Second, initiate proceedings to formally separate me from the Millstone mortgage and all shared utility obligations. And third, immediately freeze my credit with all three major bureaus to prevent any further damage. "You've made your final move, Eden," Marcus warned, leaning forward. "You just declared war on their financial reality. They will respond violently. Your mother's only defense mechanism is emotional manipulation and public smear campaigns. You need to brace for impact." The impact came within 48 hours. Once my bank officially flagged the transactions on the bait card as fraudulent and initiated the chargeback process, they contacted Riverfront Motors to inform them the deposit for the SUV was being disputed. The dealership, suddenly facing the loss of a sale and a potential investigation, immediately called Marla. My phone rang continuously for 10 minutes until I finally answered. The voice on the other end was not the gentle, desperate whisper of the liar. It was the raging shriek of a woman whose lifeline was being cut. "What did you do?" Marla screamed, her voice cracking the phone's speaker. "The car company called. You are trying to ruin us. You're getting the car taken away from me. You want Jace to fail? You're tearing this family apart. You are killing your brother's future and stealing your mother's peace. Who uses a lawyer against their own flesh and blood?" I listened silently, recording the call under Marcus's prior instruction. Her accusations were a torrent of pure projection. When she paused for breath, I simply said, "You knowingly used a card you promised was for an emergency to buy a vehicle. That is fraud, Mom. I am just correcting the record." I then hung up. Unable to manipulate me privately, Marla immediately took the fight public, just as Marcus had predicted. She posted a lengthy, rambling essay on Facebook, painting me as the villain of a dark family saga. The post was melodramatic, filled with phrases like, "the cruel hand of my own flesh and blood," and "the heartless child who uses lawyers to crush her aging mother." She meticulously avoided mentioning the SUV, the motorcycle, or the $5,000 in question. The narrative was simple. Eden is cold, successful, and is using her power and legal resources to punish her loving, struggling family. The response was swift and painful. The deluge of texts and comments started. They came from old neighbors, distant cousins, and Marla's network of sympathizers. "Aiden, this isn't like you. Family forgives. You really sick a lawyer on your own mom? That's low. Remember where you came from, girl." Most of the messages were accusatory. A few were confused. Almost none of them paused to ask me for my side of the story. They simply consumed Marla's drama and delivered judgment. It was a searing reminder of how easily the truth is drowned out by a good victim narrative. Then came the unexpected twist that fueled my resolve. An old neighbor from Millstone, a kind woman named Mrs. Jennings, who had witnessed Marla's behavior firsthand over the years, sent me a private message. Attached was a video. The shaky phone footage, recorded at a casual backyard party, showed Marla holding a glass of wine, loudly boasting to a group of friends. She was preening, her voice carrying an obnoxious pride. "Oh, that's just how you play the system," she slurred, clearly a few drinks in. "I got a daughter. See? She's got that gold-plated credit, and she's terrified of confrontation. She's my golden credit child. Never dares to say no." The laughter of her friends confirmed their complicity in her view of me as a resource. That video was the antidote to the Facebook grief. It wasn't manipulation. It was confession, preserved on camera. It proved the systemic, knowing nature of the abuse. The escalation peaked when Jace decided to deliver his own public performance of outrage. Mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, while I was inside analyzing data for Solace metrics, the quiet serenity of the glass and steel office building was shattered by the deafening roar of a motorcycle. Jace, clearly coached by Marla, had ridden the stolen motorcycle the 300 miles to Riverton. He parked illegally directly in front of the lobby, revving the engine over and over again. As several of my colleagues took their smoke break outside, Jace ripped off his helmet, pointed directly at the building, and screamed, "Eden Stewart, you are a family traitor. You're cutting off your own brother. You'll regret this, you backstabbing witch." He kept up the bellowing until building security had to physically intervene and call the police to disperse him. The incident was humiliating, public, and crossed a major professional boundary. Shortly after, the human resources manager at Solace Metrics called me into her office. She wasn't there to discipline me, but her concern was palpable. "Eden, we understand this is an intensely personal matter, but it's affecting the workplace environment," she said gently. "We are not blaming you, but you need protection. We strongly advise you to file for a restraining or protective order against your brother, and potentially your mother, if this continues." The thought of filing a restraining order against my own brother, the boy I used to read bedtime stories to, was wrenching, but the threat was real. The harassment was documented, and my career, my actual future, was now collateral damage in their emotional war. Following Marcus's advice, I spent the rest of the day at the Riverton Police Department. I did not press criminal charges yet. Instead, I filed an extensive initial report, a sworn affidavit documenting the timeline of the fraud, the unauthorized accounts, the forged signatures, the audio evidence, and the public harassment that had just occurred. I also sent formal fraud reports to the 3 credit reporting agencies. This created an official, undisputed, legal paper trail documenting the abuse and establishing my position as the victim. I walked out of the police station after 7 o'clock that evening. The Colorado twilight had descended. Cold and unforgiving, I felt utterly exposed. Every financial secret, every humiliation, now documented in a government file for strangers to read. But under the exposure was a sudden, fierce strength. They were willing to humiliate me publicly, to slander my name across the internet, and to attack me at my workplace. If they were willing to strip away my dignity in front of the world to protect their debt-funded illusion, I was no longer obligated to shield their reputation or their dirty secrets. The battle had officially moved from the kitchen table to the public domain. The weeks following Jace's workplace stunt were quiet, but the silence was deceptive. It was the calm before a financial storm. I was waiting for the systems of leverage to finally turn on my mother. The first official notification arrived 3 weeks after I filed the police report. It wasn't a nice letter. It was a terse, registered notice from the Millstone Bank. The mortgage on the house was now in a critically dangerous state due to multiple successive late payments. The bank was threatening to accelerate the debt and, more ominously, stated it was prepared to execute remedies against the co-signer with demonstrable, stable income. The phrase struck me like a physical blow. Co-signer with demonstrable, stable income. The bank wasn't going to chase the phantom money Marla claimed to have. They were coming for the verifiable paycheck of the risk analyst in Riverton. My old, naive decision to sign those papers when I was 18 had finally come home to collect. Marcus had prepared me for this. He needed the last, undeniable admission. So I called Marla, initiating a video chat, but ensuring I had my phone set to screen record the entire interaction. I started calmly, holding up the letter. "Mom, the bank is coming after me for the Millstone house. I need you to explain why my signature is on the last 3 extension agreements, the ones I never saw." Marla's face on the screen twisted in panic. She couldn't deploy her usual weeping defense while on video. Knowing I had the letter, she defaulted to self-pity and necessity. "They wouldn't listen to me. Eden?" she blurted out, defensive and trapped. "They kept saying I needed a co-signer with credit like yours. I was forced to do it. We would have lost the house otherwise. I had to sign your name. Honey, I had to, or the bank wouldn't play ball." It was the gold bullet, a clear, recorded confession of forgery, not just under duress, but under the conscious, stated goal of leveraging my identity to manipulate a financial institution. Then, Jace wandered into the background of the shot. He looked disheveled and slightly drunk, likely nursing a hangover after his brief, explosive celebrity moment. Hearing the tension, he stumbled closer to the phone. his face looming into the camera. "Don't you dare, Eden," he slurred, pointing a wobbly finger. "You owe us. Mom sacrificed her whole life to raise you and pay for your fancy college. You owe us this house." His drunken outburst confirmed two key facts in one sloppy sentence. He knew about the forgery, Marla had confided in him, and they both fundamentally believed my life was a perpetual, redeemable debt to them. I immediately ended the call and sent the screen recording to Marcus. "This is it, Eden," Marcus confirmed after reviewing the video. "This is the definitive admission of forgery and intentional misuse of identity to secure a favorable loan modification. This allows us to legally demonstrate that your liability on the mortgage is void because your signature was illegally obtained. It's enough to separate you from the debt and give the authorities grounds for further investigation." The path was clear. File the recorded confession, get separated from the mortgage, and begin the serious process of criminal reporting. The twist of the poisoned offer. Before I could sign the final paperwork, Marcus had drawn up. Marla called me back. Her tone was unnaturally, sickly sweet. Gone was the hysteria, replaced by a calculated charm that was even more repulsive. "Honey, let's stop this nonsense," she purred. "We're family. I have an offer for you, a real agreement." The agreement was shockingly blunt. If I would quietly pay off the full remaining balances on the car and the motorcycle, and also bring the Millstone mortgage back to a non-delinquent status, effectively erasing all their financial errors, they promised they would never, ever ask for anything again. The way she presented it, using the soft voice and the word agreement, was meant to sound like a concession, a mother throwing her daughter a bone, but I heard the subtext loud and clear. They were not asking for forgiveness. They were bargaining with my future. They still believed they held the moral high ground, that their debt was a card they could play against my desire for peace. Their entitlement was boundless. I feigned hesitation for a moment. "I need to think about that. Mom, this is serious. I think we need to talk face to face. Just us, Jace, and me." I proposed a meeting at Jace's birthday party, scheduled for the following weekend at a relative's property on the outskirts of Millstone. "No lawyers, no shouting," I suggested. "Just talk it out, openly, in front of the people who care about us." The lie worked. Marla, confident that she could deploy her tearful manipulation tactics in a semi-public, emotionally charged setting, agreed immediately. She thought she was setting the stage for a dramatic, tearful reconciliation where I would hand over the money. In the silence of the week leading up to the party, I worked with Marcus like a tactical operative. The paperwork was finalized. The sworn affidavit of fraud, the official request to the mortgage bank to remove my name based on the forged documents, the demand letters for repayment of the bait card funds, and the police report detailing the harassment. I didn't just print the papers, I created a presentation. I upgraded my phone plan to include comprehensive, unlimited call recording. I purchased a tiny, highly sensitive audio recording device, the size of a USB stick, and attached it discreetly to my keychain. Every piece of evidence, the full 10 years of screenshots, statements, the video of Marla boasting, and the audio confession, was encrypted and backed up to 4 separate locations. That night before the party, I stood in front of the mirror in my small Riverton duplex, dressed in a simple, businesslike outfit. My reflection was calm, eyes clear. I wasn't the 28-year-old girl who drove home for every crisis anymore. The old me came to family gatherings as the firefighter, armed with a checkbook and a nervous need to restore order. The person staring back at me now was the demolition expert. I wasn't coming to put out a fire. I was coming to ignite the fuse, ready to pull the pin on the entire dysfunctional shell of the Stewart family dynamic. The Millstone setting for Jace's birthday was textbook Marla. It wasn't at their old, debt-laden house. It was held at a wealthier cousin's property, a rambling field on the edge of town, lending an air of borrowed prosperity. The scene was a chaotic tableau of celebration. Plastic folding chairs scattered across the lawn, coolers overflowing with cheap canned beer, and a dozen children tearing around, sticky with frosting and soda. It was a perfect, loud distraction from reality. The star of the show, naturally, wasn't Jace himself, but his new toys. Relatives were clustered around the matte black motorcycle, running their hands over the glossy finish, marveling at the custom sound system. The consensus among the onlookers was loud and clear. Jace is finally turning his life around. Look how well he's doing. They admired the bike and the gleaming red SUV parked prominently nearby, projecting their own small-town aspirations onto Marla's latest scheme. Marla, of course, arrived fashionably late, driving the SUV right up onto the lawn where everyone could see it. She looked triumphant, playing the role of the devoted single mother who had finally seen her sacrifices pay off. She regaled a small group of aunts with a fabricated story about how she had worked tirelessly and pulled off a miracle to ensure her son had a reliable future. She was careful not to mention credit scores, co-signing, or the actual means of acquisition. She accepted the compliments and admiration like a well-deserved medal, her vanity completely eclipsing her guilt. I arrived a half hour later. Unlike every other guest, I wasn't carrying a brightly wrapped box or a casserole dish. I wore dark, sensible slacks and a crisp button-down shirt, looking less like a family member and more like an auditor. In my hand, I carried a slim, stiff manila folder. A few of the older cousins, the ones who had been whispering after Marla's dramatic Facebook post, noticed me immediately. They saw the lack of a gift, the professional demeanor, and the folder, and an uneasy silence started to ripple outward from their cluster. Their eyes followed me, a silent acknowledgement that this was not a social call. The moment came just as Marla brought out the birthday cake, a monstrosity decorated with black frosting and flames, a tribute to Jace's new machine. She gathered everyone into a tight circle around the folding table. Jace was in the center, beaming, ready to blow out the candles. Marla, ever the stage director, then grabbed my arm and pulled me into the circle, right next to Jace. "Before we cut the cake," Marla announced, her voice pitched high with false emotion, perfect for her audience, "I want Eden to say a word. She's been going through a tough time, and some things have been misunderstood. I want my daughter to tell everyone the truth. Don't you, sweetie?" It was a brilliant, manipulative move. She was framing the confrontation as my opportunity to apologize for my misunderstanding, demanding my surrender in public. She was certain that under the pressure of 20 pairs of watchful eyes, I would fold, weep, and beg for forgiveness. I didn't blink. I didn't apologize. I pulled the slim manila folder open. The silence had now spread beyond the inner circle, drawing the attention of the kids and the men watching the game on a portable television. I didn't yell. I spoke in the calm, measured tone I used when presenting complex data to senior management at Solace Metrics. I spoke to the audience, but my eyes were fixed on Marla and Jace. "The truth is exactly what I'm here to tell you," I began, my voice clear and carrying across the lawn. "The truth is that for 10 years, I have been systematically defrauded by my mother, Marla Stewart, and facilitated by my brother, Jace Stewart. They have consistently used my identity and my credit as an extension of their own income." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. I pulled out the first document, the Millstone Mortgage Extension. "This is the mortgage on the house where Marla and Jace live. I signed the original when I was 18. I never signed the subsequent 3 extensions. As you can see by comparing the signature to the original, the signatures on these documents were forged to prevent the bank from foreclosing on their bad decisions, transferring the risk directly to me." I placed the document on the table, covering the fake flames on the cake. Next came the credit report. This is a detailed report showing unauthorized accounts, a furniture card in Columbus, Ohio, a city I've never lived in, with a balance of over $8,000, and this store card, which she opened under my name years ago, is in collection. This is not sharing. This is identity theft. Marla finally found her voice, a raw, strangled sound. "Lies! She's lying to you all. She's doing this to hurt me." Jace, his face flushed and his bravado collapsing, sputtered. "The cars were a loan. It was a gift." I held up the third document, the police report. This is the official police affidavit I filed last week, documenting the years of financial fraud and the public harassment that occurred at my place of work. Solace metrics. Then came the final, devastating move. I held up my phone, my thumb hovering over the play button. I sent Marla a new card, a bait card. 3 weeks ago, she told me it was for a $2,000 medical emergency for Jace. When I confronted her about the fraud, she and Jace defended it with a confession. They were so confident in my perpetual silence that they bragged about it on a private video and in a phone call. I pressed play, holding the phone close to the microphone I had activated on my keychain recorder, amplifying the sound slightly through the phone's speaker. The backyard fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. You could hear the distant traffic on the highway. The sound that filled the air was Marla's voice, sharp and high, boasting to her friends at the party. "Oh, that's just how you play the system. I got a daughter, see? She's got that gold-plated credit, and she's terrified of confrontation. She's my golden credit child. Never dares to say no." The clip cut. Then came Jace's drunken, smug laugh from the later video. "Yeah, she thinks she's paying off a loan. Mom, we got this thing for free. Thanks, Eden's credit." The party fractured instantly. Half the relatives, embarrassed and shocked by the raw, undisputed evidence, immediately looked away, picking up their children or focusing intently on their beer cans. The other half stared openly, their pity for Marla replaced by a cold, appraising disgust. "That's it," an older cousin named David interjected, stepping forward. He was a decent man, a carpenter who had always stayed out of the family drama. "I knew it, Marla. You came to me 2 years ago, asking me to co-sign a huge loan, and I told you no. I smelled the fraud then. I can't believe you did this to your own daughter. Eden." Marla, seeing her stage destroyed, went for the only thing she had left, the tears. She crumpled to the ground, sobbing dramatically, pointing at me. "She's ruined us. She's slandering her own mother in front of the family. She's a monster. Every family does this. This is how family helps. Why are you all listening to her lies?" But the tears didn't work this time. The recorded voice, cold and proud, still hung in the air. The relatives who had known me for years, the quiet, financially responsible one, could now compare the two narratives and see the truth. I ignored her performance. I placed the final documents, the formal notice of fraud to the Millstone Bank, the official letter from Marcus Lowell, and the copy of the police report, on the table, weighted down by a bottle of cheap soda. "I am formally disputing all charges related to the SUV and the motorcycle," I announced, addressing the relatives who were still standing. "And I have informed the bank about the forged signatures on the mortgage. This is no longer a conversation about forgiveness. It is a legal case." I turned, walked away from the ruined birthday cake and the stunned silence, and headed for my car. As I started the engine, pulling onto the main road, I caught a final glimpse of Jace. He was standing next to his motorcycle, his back straight, still trying to force a look of injured pride. Then, his face went slack. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking toward the property entrance. A large yellow flatbed tow truck from a different, larger national repossession company was driving slowly past the cousins' driveway. It wasn't there for them today. My bank's actions hadn't been fully processed yet, but Jace's face, watching that truck, was the look of a man who suddenly realized what that vehicle represented, the inevitable, inescapable future. I knew the paperwork I filed was already moving through the system. The car and the motorcycle were technically already on a repossession list, and the Millstone house was next. I drove away, leaving behind the pieces of a family shell I had finally detonated, feeling the cold, hard satisfaction of a perfectly closed case. The weeks immediately following the birthday party confrontation were dedicated to watching the systems I had activated take effect. It was an exercise in pure, cold patience, observing the legal and financial repercussions cascade down the ladder of responsibility, landing squarely where they belonged. The first ripples hit the commercial sector. Because I had officially disputed the transactions on the bait card, the car dealership, Riverfront Motors, received a chargeback notification. Their lawyers immediately informed Marla that the sale was void and the financing contract was being canceled. Simultaneously, the insurance company, alerted to the fraud report I filed with the police, also initiated an investigation into the vehicles, putting all policies on hold due to suspicion of misrepresentation, since the initial $5,000 medical emergency had been proven false. The phone calls that used to flood my line now bypassed me entirely. Aiming straight for Marla's number, the financial world was finally, decisively, turning its back on them. The bigger structural collapse came from the Millstone Bank. Marcus Lowell had been surgical, presenting the recorded confession of forgery alongside the handwriting analysis of the mortgage extension documents. The bank's legal department quickly realized their exposure was far greater if they tried to enforce a contract with a proven forged signature. Within 2 weeks, I received formal confirmation. The Millstone Bank had accepted my evidence, removed my name as cosigner, and was now initiating its own internal investigation into the forgery, with all legal liability and responsibility for the delinquent payments resting solely on Marla Stewart. The sword of Damocles that had hung over my future for 10 years was finally lifted and transferred to her account. The twist of repossession. Then, the performance moved from the legal papers to the public stage. One morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Jennings, the kind Millstone neighbor who had sent the video evidence. It was another shaky phone video, but the content was stark. It was the gleaming red SUV, parked in the cracked driveway of the Millstone house, being slowly and professionally cabled onto a flatbed tow truck. The audio was a symphony of Marla's raw, unadulterated fury. She was shrieking, beating her fists against the truck's fender, desperately trying to stop the inevitable. "No, you can't take it. This is my life. Eden, you did this to me. You sick, heartless little girl. You dragged me into this. This is your fault." She wasn't mourning the loss of the vehicle. She was mourning the loss of the lie the vehicle represented. And she was screaming my name, desperate to blame the consequence on the one who enforced the rules, not the one who broke them. A few days later, another video arrived. This time, Jace's fate was sealed. The matte black motorcycle was being winched onto a specialized hauler right outside a local Millstone bar. A final, humiliating public service announcement. Jace, looking smaller and less like a rock star than ever, was standing on the curb, screaming obscenities at the repo man and the gathering crowd of his bar friends. His friends, the ones who had cheered his manifested success, now stood frozen in varying stages of surprise and embarrassment, watching the entire performance unravel. Jace's public image, his entire facade of effortless cool, was literally being towed away. Marla immediately launched a new season of drama online, a fresh round of social media warfare. She posted pictures of the empty driveway, railing about how I had called the law and the banks on her own family purely for revenge. But this time, the echo chamber was silent. Only a handful of the most dedicated sycophants interacted. Most of the family and acquaintances who had witnessed the scene at the birthday party had gone completely quiet, unwilling to defend a lie that was now so visually and legally apparent. In a final, desperate attempt to regain control, Jace drove the 300 miles to Riverton. It was close to midnight when the frantic pounding started on the door of my duplex. "Eden, open the door! You fix this, right now!" he yelled, his voice thick with a mix of fury and fear. "I swear I'll slash your tires. I'll break your windows. You need to call off your lawyer and fix what you did." He was operating on pure, entitled panic. The consequences had become too real, and his only recourse was to default to childish violence and threats. I did not open the door. I did not speak. Instead, I activated the video recording on my phone, capturing the sounds of his escalating threats and the frantic, abusive pounding. Then, I called the Riverton Police Department. The police arrived within 7 minutes. They found Jace pacing erratically on my lawn. I slipped Marcus Lowell's prepared documents, the copy of the police report, the affidavit of fraud, and the temporary protective order request, under the door for the officers to review. They swiftly separated Jace from my property, sternly warning him that any further contact would result in his immediate arrest for aggravated harassment and violation of a pending restraining order. Jace was left stranded, his rage impotent against the cold force of the law. The next morning, an email landed in my inbox from Marcus. The news was measured, but profound. Eden, the prosecutor's office has reviewed the accumulated evidence, specifically the audio confession regarding the forged signature and the documented pattern of identity misuse. They are moving forward with consideration of a limited case against Marla Stewart for felony identity fraud and forgery. They have enough evidence to secure a conviction. It was the ultimate vindication. The state had recognized the family drama as what it truly was, a crime. Marla called me one final time that afternoon. The usual tearful performance was gone. Her voice was flat, hard, and laced with resentment, the voice of a cornered predator trying to negotiate. "Okay, Eden," she said, skipping any greeting. "Let's cut the crap. If you withdraw the police reports and the fraud complaint, if you stop making this a big deal, I promise I will never, ever touch your name again. We can walk away from this right now. You just have to stop." She was offering a conditional peace, still believing she held the authority to grant me freedom. I took a deep, steadying breath. My reply was the truth, delivered with the same calm authority I'd used at the party. "Mom," I said, my voice empty of malice but full of finality, "you lost the right to bargain with my future the very first time you signed my name to a document without asking me." I didn't wait for her reply. I pressed the end call button and, for the first time in my 28 years, I blocked Marla's number forever. Nearly 1 year had passed since the sound of a closing door sealed my boundary forever. The Riverton sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows of my new apartment, my apartment, purchased 3 months ago after an exhaustive, difficult, but ultimately successful process of financial reclamation. The space was bright, quiet, and completely unburdened by the ghosts of Millstone. The year had been an exercise in legal and financial scrubbing. Working with Marcus, I had systematically dismantled every fraudulent account, every co-signed obligation, and every lingering piece of financial shrapnel Marla had embedded in my life. It was painstaking work, submitting affidavits, filing disputes, and dealing with bewildered bank representatives. My credit rating, once battered by the unauthorized debt, was now gleaming. Having shed every piece of tainted history, I had paid off the minimal personal debt I incurred during the struggle and, for the first time, my entire net worth was entirely clean, entirely mine, and completely severed from Millstone. Professionally, the cleanup had an unexpected side effect. At Solace Metrics, I was promoted to senior risk analyst just 2 months prior. My boss admitted the promotion was partly due to my work on my own case. My unique experience, the intimate knowledge of how familial manipulation and gaslighting translated into specific, repeatable fraud patterns, had given me an almost uncanny ability to spot similar cases in the company's client data. I wasn't just relying on algorithms anymore. I was applying a hard-won emotional truth to the cold numbers. I had been exploited, but that exploitation had forged me into a better, sharper analyst. My revenge was no longer loud or public. It was silent, systematic, and focused on helping others. In the evenings, I began collaborating with Marcus on a small pro bono project. We were building educational materials and guides for victims of familial financial abuse, people trapped in the same gilded cages of guilt and dependency I had escaped. In one section, we created a fictional case study of a mother and son using an adult child's credit to fund a luxury vehicle purchase under the guise of a medical emergency. The parallels to Marla's case were unmistakable, serving as a clean, clinical warning to others that this wasn't love. It was a crime. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother's actions, fictionalized and sanitized, were now being used as a training tool to prevent her type of abuse globally. The Millstone anchor had finally sunk. Unable to meet the obligations of the fraudulently extended mortgage, and with the bank's legal team pressing her on the forgery. Marla was forced to let the house go. It entered foreclosure and was eventually sold at a significant loss. The Millstone house, the very symbol of her leveraged power over me, was gone. Marla moved into a tiny, overpriced rental apartment in a neighboring town, stripped of the last great symbol of her claimed status. She had lost her primary financial weapon and, with it, any leverage she might have had left over my name. Jace, predictably, struggled. Without the constant flow of cash and the luxury purchases funded by my credit, his self-made success evaporated. He bounced between low-paying contract jobs and delivering fast food. His reputation as the successful, carefree younger brother utterly destroyed in the eyes of the family members who had seen the tow truck videos. The consequences were boringly, karmically predictable. The final legal chapter closed quietly via certified mail. I received a letter from the Millstone County Prosecutor's Office. Marla had accepted a plea agreement. It wasn't the sensational jail time some part of me had perhaps once craved, but it was far more effective. She pleaded guilty to a lesser charge related to the forgery. The agreement came with a permanent, court-mandated restriction on her ability to open or co-sign any form of credit under another person's name, and she was forced to complete a 6-month mandatory financial management course. It was a permanent legal chain, a final official restriction placed on her freedom to abuse. She could never, ever again use the phrase family necessity to justify a crime against me or anyone else. The last flicker of contact arrived a week later. A handwritten letter on thin paper, mailed to my old address and forwarded. Marla's familiar, looping script was filled with 75% blame, 25% self-pity, and about 0% genuine apology. It ended, as it always did, with the ultimate demand: a daughter must always help her mother, no matter what. I read it once, quickly, absorbing the total lack of accountability, and placed it directly into the paper shredder. There were no tears, no anger, only a profound sense of emptiness, a realization that there was nothing left to regret. The relationship was an empty husk, and now, so was the physical evidence of it. In a symbolic act of closure, I logged into my banking app. I formally closed the household stuff checking account and retrieved the plastic bait card. I took a pair of heavy office shears and sliced the gold plastic into 3 neat pieces, dropping them into the trash. It wasn't because I still needed to protect myself. The legal framework had already done that. It was because the guarded, defensive version of myself, the person who had to create that bait card as a trap, was no longer who I was. I pulled up my true accounts. The emergency fund was full, the investment account was steadily growing, and the mortgage on my new Riverton apartment was being paid on time every month. For the first time in my 28 years, every single dollar attached to my name was a direct result of my own choice, my own labor, and my own ethical management. No one was dragging me down. No one was claiming ownership. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I was sitting on my balcony with Taryn, sipping coffee and watching the city wake up beneath the Rockies. "You know, you should send her an invoice," Taryn mused, looking out over the skyline. "For the 10 years of emotional distress and the 200 hours of forensic accounting you had to do. Call it mental damages and consulting fee." We both laughed. It wasn't the bitter, exhausted laughter of the past. It was light, easy, and profoundly relieved. Just then, my phone chimed, not with a text from Millstone, but with a work alert. A new fraud case had been flagged in Solace Metric's system, a suspicious pattern of small, successive charges on a client's account. I smiled, flagged the case for immediate review, and leaned back in my chair. I couldn't save my family from themselves, I thought, but I could protect my life from them, and now I could use that knowledge to protect others. The true revenge wasn't the repossession of the motorcycle or the loss of the house. It was the fact that their chaos could never touch my future again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but I'm finally free. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to like the video, And hit that hype button to help more people hear my story and understand the signs of financial abuse. And don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories.